the biggest hurdle to making this a reality is the fact that it needs a bunch of constitutional amendments about the term of an assembly, about how an assembly can be dismissed, about how all of this will work. The Representation of People Act will need to be amended. So there are a bunch of constitutional changes that are needed, not easy to do. There's been a lot of speculation as to why the government has called a special session of Parliament in September. And one of the theories being put forth was that it's going to discuss one nation, one poll, and probably bring some bills that are required to actually make this a reality. Now we don't know whether that is going to happen. Now the interesting thing is that this is not a new idea, and there's already been a lot of work done in this area. Specifically, I'd like to refer to 3 reports that have come out. The first one came out in 2015, and this is a Parliamentary Standing Committee's report on what needed to be done to have one nation, one poll. The second one came out in 2017, which was a Niti Aayog report authored by Vivek Debroy. And the third one came out in 2018, which was a Law Commission report. And all of them, there is a fair degree of agreement between all 3 of the reports. But first, it's important to understand where everyone is coming from. And I work in a newsroom. I've worked in a newsroom all my life. And over the last several years, there's this sensation that I have, and a lot of my colleagues have, that we on this treadmill which is just running, right? I mean, it's like one election cycle that doesn't stop. You have a national election, then you have state elections, and then you have more state elections. And these days, of course, even local elections have become competitive, largely because of the BJP, which likes to compete in everything and which likes to win everything, or actually doesn't like to lose anything. So it's become like one endless cycle of elections, and the question that needs to be asked is this affecting governance in some way? And the answer is probably, right? So it makes sense, makes imminent sense to have elections once in 5 years and to have them simultaneously for both the Lok Sabha as well as the state assemblies. It will definitely mean a reduction in expenditure. And of course, I also think that it could mean better relations in Parliament, simply because a lot of the friction that is there is because there is always an election which, 2 sides are fighting against each other. If that happens only once in 5 years, you might actually get more work done in Parliament. So there are a host of reasons why it makes sense. And of course, when elections in India started, they started simultaneously. It's just that over a period of time, and the biggest break was in the late 60s. It's just that over a period of time, with governments being dismissed, no confidence motions, with various other things, the cycle got disrupted. Let's now look at the mechanics. The biggest hurdle to making this a reality is the fact that it needs a bunch of constitutional amendments about the term of an assembly, about how an assembly can be dismissed, about how all of this will work. The Representation of People Act will need to be amended. So there are a bunch of constitutional changes that are needed, not easy to do. The Law Commission report also said that it probably made sense to get a buy-in of the states, or a buy-in of the majority of the states, but given the NDA's ability to get the NDA rules governs several states already, many states, over I think around 12 if I'm not mistaken, and they also have friendly parties which are taking care of a few other states. So it makes sense. I think it will be fairly easy for them to get this approved by at least a majority of the state government. Some of the others will oppose it. There's been some talk about who will benefit from this. I think it's far too premature to say anything about it. It's not as if having an election at the same time is going to benefit the Bharatiya Janata Party. It's not as if it's going to benefit regional parties. It's not particularly clear. All that is clear is that it's a good idea, but that's what it is at this point in time. The mechanics are going to be difficult. What do the three reports say on how this can be done? So let's assume that all the other hurdles are crossed. The constitutional amendments are made, the states are on board, and everyone says, great, this is a good idea, it's going to help us focus on governance. How then will it happen? Let's assume it's going to happen next year. And like I said, assume this is a hypothetical scenario. The first thing that will happen is that the elections that are going to happen towards the end of this year, the state elections in Rajasthan, Chhattisgarh, Madhya Pradesh, Telangana and Mizoram will not happen. They will be pushed back by 6 months to coincide with the Lok Sabha elections. Now, along with the Lok Sabha elections, there are, I think, 4 states that always go to the polls in recent years. Odisha, Arunachal Pradesh, Andhra Pradesh, and one more, right? And then, so that will of course happen. And then there are a bunch of states that go to polls later in 2024, includes Haryana, I think it includes Sikkim, those will be Maharashtra, those will be brought forward perhaps by around 6 months, which means the tenure of their assemblies will need to be curtailed, just like the tenure of the assemblies of the states that are going to poll this year, end of this year, will need to be extended. All of these are going to require amendments. And these bunch of states will then go to poll along with the Lok Sabha elections in mid-2024. Now, Delhi is a unique situation because the Delhi election is next scheduled to happen in 2025 February, which means it's just on the border. So I'm not clear what's going to happen. Because bringing it forward will be controversial, pushing it back will be even more controversial. So I'm not clear what's going to happen. But the next thing that will happen is all the other states, because in 2025 the other state that goes to poll is Bihar. That's much later in the year. All of those states will then go to polls in mid-2026. And here is the rub. These state assemblies, according to the reports that have been put out, will have a shortened tenure. They will have a tenure of 3 years, which again is going to require some amendments. It's also going to require a lot of convincing of those people. And that way, you have one bunch of elections in 2024, you have one bunch of elections in 2026, but the bunch of states that go to polls in 2026 have a limited tenure. So the next election that happens is 2029, April, May, everything together, and you have one nation, one poll. To be sure, I have no clue, and for that matter, nor do the authors of the reports, because while they do mention these scenarios, they're also not very clear about it. But no one really knows what to do with no confidence motions, defections, right? All of these things that cause a shortened tenure of an assembly, right? So if a government falls, or if there is a hung assembly, what happens then? Those scenarios are not clear. You will need a lot more thinking before that can happen. It's one of the reasons why I'm pretty convinced that you're not going to see it in 2024, but one can never say, right? I mean, these things could always be done, but my own sense is it's not the kind of thing that can be rushed through.